This morning you ate something no wild animal ever could. You opened a cabinet, or a bag, or a box, and there it was, food, just sitting there waiting for you. You did not track it across a valley. You did not dig for it in the dirt. You did not fight anything for it. But the real story behind that ordinary moment is far stranger than convenience. The single most important decision in human history was made by people who had no idea they were making it. It reshaped your body. It reshaped your mind. It built the entire world you are sitting in right now, and many scientists believe it was a disaster. So how could the choice that created civilization also be one of the worst mistakes your species ever made? To understand that, you have to travel back, far back, past the cities, past the kings, past the very first farms. For more than 300,000 years, your ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They did not plant crops. They did not own land. They followed the food. When the berries ripened in one valley, they walked to that valley. When the herds moved across the plains, they moved with them. Their entire world was motion. And here is the part that sounds almost impossible. In many ways, they may have had it better than you do. The anthropologist Marshall Sahlins called these foraging groups the original affluent society, not because they were rich, but because they wanted little and got it easily. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers, like the anthropologist Richard Lee's famous research among a foraging people of the Kalahari Desert, suggested that finding enough food took only around 15 to 20 hours a week. The rest of their time belonged to them. Time for rest, time for talk, time for children and stories around the fire. Think about what that means. Your distant ancestors may have worked something close to a part-time week. And what did they eat? Almost everything. Roots and fruit, nuts and seeds, fish, game, eggs, honey. Dozens of different foods that changed with the seasons. Their diet was so varied that the serious vitamin deficiencies common later in history were rare. They were often taller, stronger, and by many measures healthier than the farmers who would one day replace them. So what happened? Why would anyone give all of that up? Around 12,000 years ago, in a stretch of land curving across the modern Middle East, something quietly shifted. The last ice age was ending. The climate grew warmer and wetter. Fields of wild wheat and barley spread thick across the hills, and a people we now call the Natufians, hunter-gatherers living in what is today Israel, Syria, and Jordan, began to do something new. They stopped wandering so much. They built some of the first small villages and settled down to harvest the wild grain growing all around them. At first, they were not farmers at all. They were collectors who had simply found a very good spot. Far to the north, in what is now southern Turkey, those early people left behind something that still stuns the experts who study it, a site called Göbekli Tepe. Massive carved stone pillars, taller than a person, arranged in great rings and raised more than 11,000 years ago, before farming had truly taken hold. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt spent the last years of his life excavating it, and what he found hinted at a strange reversal of the story everyone had expected. Maybe large numbers of people gathered together first, to build and to worship, and only then needed farming to feed the crowds they had created. Slowly, across hundreds of years, gathering wild grain turned into planting it, saving the best seeds for next time, clearing the land, pulling the weeds, guarding the field. Farming did not arrive in a single flash of genius. It crept in, one small and reasonable choice at a time, until there was no longer any way back. And that is exactly when the trouble began. When scientists dig up the bones of early farmers and lay them beside the bones of the foragers who came before, they find something deeply unsettling. The farmers were sick. A biological anthropologist named George Armelagos studied ancient human remains at a place called Dixon Mounds, where one population had switched from hunting and gathering to growing corn. The skeletons told a brutal story. After farming took over, the rate of tooth decay exploded. Signs of anemia, where the bones themselves quietly starve for iron, became far more common. Scars of infection spread across the remains, and lifespans got shorter, not longer. The same grim pattern appears across much of the ancient world. As people took up farming, their average height often dropped, sometimes by several inches. Your farming ancestors were frequently smaller, weaker, and more diseased than the hunters who had walked the earth before them. Why would growing your own food make you sicker? It comes down to a cruel trade. A forager ate 100 different things. A farmer bet almost everything on a tiny handful of crops. When you live on mostly wheat, or mostly rice, or mostly corn, you can fill your stomach while starving your body of the nutrients a single plant simply cannot provide. And there is a worse danger hiding inside that bet. When you depend on one crop and that crop fails, you do not just feel hungry, you face famine. But the food was only the beginning of the problem. For the first time in the long story of your species, huge numbers of humans were living crammed together in one fixed place, all year round, surrounded by their own waste and their animals. And that single change rewrote the history of disease. Here is something that sounds backwards, but is true. Most of the deadliest illnesses in human history did not come howling out of the wild. They came from the farm. Living packed tightly together allowed germs to leap from person to person without ever dying out. And living shoulder to shoulder with domesticated animals, with cattle and pigs and chickens, opened a doorway. Diseases that once lived only inside animals crossed over into people. Measles, smallpox, and influenza are all believed to have jumped into humans from the very creatures early farmers raised. The animals that fed your ancestors were also quietly infecting them. So the farmers worked harder, ate worse, and fell sicker. And somehow it gets darker still. When you follow the herds, you cannot hoard very much. Whatever you own, you have to carry on your back. But a farmer standing beside a full granary owns something no hunter ever could: a surplus. Stored wealth that stays in one place. And the moment a few people had far more than everyone else, the seed of inequality was planted in human soil. Whoever controlled the grain controlled the people who needed it. Out of that one simple fact grew the first chiefs, the first kings, the first ruling classes, who feasted while others labored in the dirt. Your ancestors had lived for hundreds of thousands of years in small bands that were roughly equal. In just a few thousand years of farming, they invented the master, the tax, and the throne. And then they invented something even worse: war. You cannot steal a forest, you cannot carry off another band's hunting ground, but you can absolutely raid a village stuffed full of stored grain. Settled farmers, sitting on top of their precious harvests, suddenly became targets worth attacking. Land became something to seize, hold, and defend with blood. Organized, large-scale violence, real armies marching out to take what other people had grown, became a permanent feature of human life. So picture what farming actually delivered to the people who first embraced it: more work, worse health, terrible new diseases, brutal inequality, and war. The scientist Jared Diamond looked at this whole bleak ledger and gave it a name that stuck. He called the invention of agriculture the worst mistake in the history of the human race. Which leaves you staring at a haunting question. If farming made life harder, sicker, and more violent, then why on earth did your ancestors keep doing it? Why not simply walk away and return to the forest? Here is the trap: they could not. The historian Yuval Noah Harari describes it as a luxury trap. Farming squeezed more food out of every patch of land. More food meant more babies surviving to grow up. More surviving children meant more mouths to feed, which meant even more farming was needed just to keep everyone alive. With each passing generation, the population swelled a little larger and leaned on the fields a little harder. A village of 500 farmers could never go back to hunting and gathering. The land around them could not possibly feed that many wanderers. The door had silently swung shut behind them. They were not farming because it made them happy. They were farming because by then, stopping would mean starving. One harvest at a time, the trap snapped closed, and yet, this is where the entire story turns, and where the cruel joke at the heart of human history finally reveals itself. That very same trap built the world you live in. Because all of that stored grain did something no foraging society had ever managed. It freed people from the daily hunt for food. When a single farmer could grow more than one family needed, a few people no longer had to farm at all, and those freed people became something completely new. Potters and builders, priests and soldiers, thinkers and inventors. For the first time ever, human beings could specialize, spending an entire lifetime mastering one single craft. Even writing itself was born out of grain. The earliest writing system, a set of wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay called cuneiform, did not begin as poetry or prayer or storytelling. It began as accounting. Officials in the ancient cities of Mesopotamia needed a way to track sacks of barley, count heads of cattle, and record who owed what to whom. From those crowded, unequal, grain-soaked first cities flowed almost everything that came after. Mathematics, astronomy, law, money, engineering, medicine, the wheel, and eventually, science itself. The scholar James C. Scott has argued that the earliest states were built on grain precisely because grain could be measured, stored, and taxed, unlike the scattered foods of the forager. Civilization, in a very real sense, grew straight up out of the wheat field. So look at the full and final shape of it. The thing that made millions of individual lives harder is the exact same thing that carried your species all the way to the stars. The misery and the marvel grew from a single seed. And that brings the whole strange story back around to you. Look around the room you are in right now. The walls that shelter you, the lights overhead, the glowing screen in your hand, your job, which is almost certainly not chasing down your own dinner, the city humming outside your window. Every single piece of it exists because, around 10,000 years ago, your ancestors struck a bargain that wounded them and rescued you. They paid in shorter lives, aching backs, and crowded disease. You inherited the cities, the comfort, and the knowledge their long suffering slowly built.